Welcome to the Academy, where we discuss and seek a change in long term athletic development. My name is Ben Wellenbach, and I'm the dad of two girls, strength coach and owner of Boyle Fitness. And it is my desire to help educate and shift the way our current culture operates regarding long term athletic development. About 22 years ago, I had hockey practice at the Boston University ice rink. The locker rooms were located under the seats of the arena, which was concrete. It felt like a bomb shelter, but that wasn't uncommon when you see most hockey locker rooms. After practice, we changed into street clothes and walked down the concrete hallway to a door that, to my recollection, coach, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was down a couple stairs, feeling even more like a bomb shelter. It was there that I was introduced to my first formal training off ice. I had worked out before in my basement doing bodyweight things like push-ups or chin-ups, but this was life-changing. It reshaped and recalibrated a new opportunity for me. It was a way to separate myself from competition. It was an outlet that gave back what you invested in it. It was strength and conditioning, and it was led by Michael Boyle. I followed him wherever he went. If he was at BU, Burlington, Woburn, I was there. And little did I know his impact on me would be life changing. I, like all hockey players, had aspirations of playing at the highest level possible. I knew I had enough skill to play collegiately, but what kept me there, and quite frankly, what got me there, was more than skill, was my level of conditioning and durability. The impact the training had on me has led to where I am today, aspiring to do what Coach Boyle did for me as an athlete, now coach. And as I do with every guest on my podcast, I will pair each guest with a sneaker from the Nike collection that best represents them. In 1988, Nike introduced the Air Trainer SC for Bo Jackson. Bo No was the campaign we all know, remember, and love. He was a multi sport athlete who defined strength and conditioning. I chose no other colorway than the medicine ball for Coach, and it is an absolute pleasure and honor to have him on the podcast today. So, Coach, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to share some lessons learned for long term athletic development.
Thank you for having me. I love it. This might be my first podcast with a former athlete. If I'm trying to think about these, I've done quite a few, but I don't know if the interviewer was somebody who actually went through the program as a kid. So
Yeah.
it's the first for me.
Well, it's exciting because for me, this is like full circle. I really feel like it is kind of a unique situation because, you know, I never thought that when I would step in that gym that we would be sitting here, umpteen number of years later having this discussion. So it's pretty special.
Yeah, and it's probably I would say that had to have been 1994 or 5 if I was guessing. So it was 30 years
Easily.
because
Easily.
we were out of that room I think by 96. I think we were across the street in 96. Either 96. Yeah, it was 96 because we dropped football in 97. So we
Yeah.
might even have been across the street in 95, so it could have been 94. But and you're right, 3 stairs down. It actually was a full 2 stories below ground level and it had been at one point the crew tank. It was underneath the swimming pool. I don't know if you remember, but I had like a little, it wasn't even an office. I had like a little closet, and inside that closet was a room where they could film diving entries to look at how people came into the water. So when you went up in there, you could see into the pool. So
That's
we
pretty
were
funny.
we were also in danger of being swamped, I guess, at some point. If anything ever went wrong with that window, we would have been completely drowned.
I don't remember that at all.
Probably because I didn't let people in that closet because I didn't want people in there looking at the swimmers. So we kept it secret.
Well, I think I had more on my hands than what I knew what to do with in the rest of the facility. So, but in the beginning, I mean, you grew up, in the suburbs of Boston. You played sports. You kind of grew up playing. What was that like? Was it structured? Was it unstructured for you?
I mean, I guess it wasn't structured. I think the only structured thing that existed when I was a kid was Little League Baseball. So I think that was something that you could get on a team and play on a team prior to middle school. When we had what they called junior high schools then. They weren't middle schools. So we were seventh, eighth, ninth were
Yeah.
in the junior high schools. And when you got to seventh, eighth, ninth, they had teams. So they had a basketball team and they had a football team, and you could participate in organized sports. Pop Warner football was around. My father was a football player, football coach. Was not a fan of Pop Warner football, so I did not play Pop Warner football. He didn't let me, so I didn't play football till my seventh grade year
Mm,
in junior high school. And so it was. I guess it was different. Yeah, it was. I mean, there was no kind of t-ball. There was nothing organized for kids, say under the age of 12. It didn't exist.
yeah.
But free play existed. I mean, we had kids in the neighborhood, and we played baseball, and we played football, and we played street hockey, and I mean, we were constantly playing sports. I think in some ways, the birth of all this youth sports has been the death of play. In that kids don't play anymore. Funny story. I worked for the Red Sox in 2012 and 2013, and one of the things that I had done during that time, because I was just stretched so thin, but I didn't want to not do the Red Sox thing. My son was young, so in 2012 he was 8, and basically I had written. I was at that time I was really into kind of writing goals down and writing things down. And one of the things that I wrote was that I was going to play with Mark for 15 minutes every day, no matter what. I was never going to say no when he asked me to play. So I would come home in between. So I'd go to the gym in the morning. Sometimes I'd come home and sleep. And then I'd go back. I'd go to Fenway at 1 o'clock, and I'd stay at Fenway sometimes till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And sometimes he would grab me in those interims, especially on a Saturday or Sunday, and want to go outside and play catch. And I would be like, oh my God, I really don't want to do this. And I would set my timer on my phone, and I would go out in the street with him and play catch. Because at that time, I mean, yeah, he didn't end up being a baseball player, but every little kid is a baseball player
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that age. And the interesting thing about it, and the reason I tell the story, is that a guy across the street from me came out a couple of weeks later with a bag of baseballs. And he said, I want you to have these. He said, he said, you're the only dad I ever see playing with his kid in the street. And I know because I know sometimes you take him down to the field and hit on days when you don't throw. He said, so I want you to have all these extra baseballs. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. One that somebody noticed. But then it was kind of depressing in the sense that, wow, somebody that plays with their kid is unusual, which I don't know. I found that a little distressing. But it's now we pay people to play with our kids instead of doing it ourselves. And at the younger age, I think you're missing out on so much. That time that you're never going to get that time back. My son is now a sophomore in college. He's 20. And one of the greatest thing that happened was that he didn't have a job last summer, and I made him work with me on the house. I was doing some projects, we were shingling part of the house. And I said, you're gonna learn to shingle. And he hated it. Absolutely. And his attention span wasn't great, and his attention to detail wasn't great. But I got probably, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 hours in the summer with the radio on outside with him that was literally priceless. And I look at that and think that may be it. I may never get that again. I'm this summer. Pardon me. I said to my wife, and she was mad at me. I said, I hope he doesn't get a job again. I said, I hope he
Yeah,
has to work with me, because I told him I said, you're going to work one way or the other. You're going
yeah,
to get up, you're going to work. And I like that he's learning, because again, kids at his age, they can't swing a hammer. They can't use a saw.
yeah,
So he was learning some, what I think are valuable life skills. So
yeah. You know, that you had mentioned on podcast when he was interviewing you that, his concern was that with his daughters, he was, saying, how do you get your kids involved? And, your response back was, you basically said invite your friends, and we're coming to the gym. That's just the way it is. And we would pick them up along the way. And I think what you're saying is you're creating excuses or opportunities, whatever word you want to I guess, associate with, to really spend time with your kids and give them some development.
Yeah, you're getting the opportunity to influence them in a positive way.
Yeah.
I actually at one point I traded my car in because I wanted a third row seat because all of a sudden there was so many kids who wanted to come to the gym and suddenly it was, can this kid come, can this kid come, and I realized, okay, we need to be able to get, I could get six kids and me in the car. And that literally was why I went to the dealership and I said I need a car with a third row seat
Uh,
because I want to be able to get all these kids. And it wasn't that I wanted them to come to the gym as much as it was that I wanted that time with my son, and what he wanted was time with his friends.
yep.
So I thought, hey, we can combine those two things. The interesting thing of our group, almost every kid in that group is playing a sport in college,
I love
which is
that.
crazy. I think, there's three or four kids on his. He's playing at St. Anselm's, which is a really good Division II program up in Manchester.
Hmm.
And there's another kid playing down in Rhode Island. There's a kid playing Division I at UMass. There's another girl playing. One of the girls that used to come with us is playing at Dartmouth, playing hockey.
Hmm.
Almost every single one of these kids who committed to training is playing a college sport, and I really believe that it's the separating factor. There are a lot of kids who say they want to play a college sport. There are not a lot of kids who are willing to do what it takes to play a college sport, and those things are entirely different things. And it was interesting because my daughter was a little bit different. My son sometimes would be like, "Oh, I don't really want to go." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter. You're going. You're going twice a week." And we'd get into these little arguments. And I said, "Hey, here's the deal. The day you say to me, Dad, I'm a recreational athlete. I don't care about playing in college. I don't care if I'm good in high school. I'm just doing this to be for fun, to be around my friends." I said, "I'll approach everything else differently. But you can't tell me that you want to be the captain of the lacrosse team, that you want to be the captain of the hockey team, and that you want to be able to play one of these sports in college, and then tell me that you don't want to commit, because those two things don't go together. So I'm going to tell you that this is what it takes until you tell me that you're out." And he'd always kind of give me that look like, "Oh, you're right, I'll go." But the flip side, when he was little, when we started when he was 10, which is too young, but again, my kids begged to go because they wanted to be in the gym and they thought it was cool. But my son at about 10 and a half realized I've made a terrible mistake here. And I really would much rather be playing with my friends. I would much rather be at the park or playing street hockey or doing whatever it is. And we were arguing about it fairly regularly. And I said to him one day, "Mark," I said, let's just stop going until you're ready to go again. And when you're ready to go again, you can tell me." And we probably went about a 3 month period where he didn't go to the gym. And then he came back and said, "No, I really want to go. I should be going. I want to do this." And at that time, at 11, that's when we started kind of putting our little band of kids together. And I'd take all anybody that he wanted to bring, I would take. Didn't charge him. They were in our group. And some of these kids stayed with us 4 or 5 years, all through high school. And we really saw the benefit of that. They won the state championship in lacrosse. They were one game away from they lost in the state quarterfinal in hockey, and it lost to Zavarian, which again, we were a public school. We lost to a Catholic school, but
Yeah.
they all had really good athletic careers in high school, and I really believe a huge part of that was the fact that they committed.
I find that strength and conditioning is really the ultimate equalizer. You know, 400 pounds here in Chicago is 400 pounds in Boston. It's 400 pounds in Italy and China. And it doesn't, it, it, to me, one of my old coaches said that, sports in general tests your builds character, but more so reveals character. And I think that's even more so from a strength and conditioning standpoint, because like you said, when it came to Mark, you know, you can say you want to play college athletics all you want, but if you're not going to have the actions that then reflect that, you're a little incongruent, basically.
Mhm.
But
Sorry, I apologize. No. What do you need? Oh, okay. Sorry. I can do it. Oh, go ahead. Go back. Sorry, I apologize.
That's
My wife
no,
was.
that's fine.
Oh,
This
thank
is such as life. So, how long did you play sports? Because didn't you power lift and then you injured
I
yourself?
started. I played my freshman year of college. I played freshman football, and I actually did a podcast yesterday with another friend of mine, and I say the same thing over and over again in terms of my career was ended by two things that end a lot of careers: lack of size and lack of talent. I was not big enough, and I wasn't good enough. But that lack of ability is what led me to strength training. So I think in so many ways,
Yes,
my gift for being average was that I started the process of trying to get myself better, and that part changed my whole life. So in some ways, I think there's a gift in average, and there's maybe a little bit of a curse in having some talent. And that was one of the things I fought with my own kids. My own kids are talented; they're much more talented than I was. My daughter was really talented, and trying to manage that talent was a big deal. My son was probably more talented, but across a broader spectrum. Like he decided he was going to try out for golf. He tore his ACL, didn't do anything for 6 months, and then started golfing in the summer, and was as well could always hit a golf ball naturally. Could hit a golf ball, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going off the golf team. I'm going to make the golf team as a senior so I can be a three sport athlete." And I'm like, "Mark, you're coming off your ACL 6 months. You haven't even used your driver yet." And he was kind of like, "Oh, well, I sort of lied to you about not using my driver because I had let him go golfing with his friends. I said, just don't drive. You can just go and kind of chip and putt and walk on the course." But he went out and made the golf team. But in some ways, they didn't have that. I had that average overachiever mentality where I thought I got to be doing these things. If I'm not doing these things, I'm just not even in the game. Whereas they were very much in the game, particularly in high school, where it's just easy to live. It's easy to live on talent in high school. Then and everybody goes through the same process. And for some guys, it's their first year in the NHL when they suddenly wake up and realize, wow, everybody here is really good. When I was working in the NHL, Joe Sacco and Jay Pandolfo were playing in the NHL. And I can remember that they were both fourth line players in the NHL. Joe Sacco had a really long career as a fourth line guy, and Jay had a really long career as a fourth line guy. And I used to think about them, and I was like, man, they were elite offensive players in college at one of the best college programs in the country. But for them to have a long NHL career, they had to reinvent themselves as these great checking line guys. And they were able to do that because they learned at BU, you learn defense, you learn you're not allowed to play one side of the puck, one end of the rink. But everybody's going to come up against that somewhere along the line. And in a lot of ways, I sometimes think the sooner the better. I think sometimes that's why kids, it's interesting because we talk about long term athletic development. Everybody goes back to kind of the outliers thing about the kids that are born in the first third of the year, January, February, March, have a big advantage. But the reality is they don't. Because the real superstars, you look it up and like Larry Bird, LeBron, Crosby, these guys, they were born October, November. They were always playing against better competition. So in some ways, again, it's a little bit of a curse. It'll maybe make you the best player on your Pee Wee team. It might make you the best player on your high school team, but it won't necessarily make you the best player on your college team because you won't have had people consistently around you that are better than you. And to get better, a lot of times you need to be around people that are better than you. And
absolutely.
I used to let my daughter, because I mean, her aptitude in hockey as a little kid was very, very, very high. And she was a rink rat, and she would go. She was a U12 that they let play in the U14s because the U12s wasn't competitive. There was a girls program that wanted her to play there, and we went to tryouts, and I watched the U12 tryout, and I thought, oh, she had played boys the year before as an 11-year-old, and she played in Pee Wee boys, and I told the coach, I said, no, she's going to go back. She'll play this year again in the Pee Wee boys because this isn't going to be competitive enough. And the woman said, no, I'll let her play U14 if she'll play. I said, well, if you let her play U14, I'll let her play. And she was the best U14 as a 12-year-old. But she would sit at the rink and wait on Saturdays for the U19 games, and she'd literally sit with all her equipment on after a game, like, "What are you doing?" And she was like, "The U19s are always short." She said they never have enough forwards. They're gonna let me play. You watch. And invariably, someone would come over and be like, "Michaela, you want to play?" She'd be like, "Yep, I'm in." And she would play U19 games when she was 12. Now, in a U19 game, she was chasing the puck. She was running around like a maniac, just trying to keep up. But it was great for her to see, okay, this is the speed up here. And I think sometimes there's a benefit to surfing ability levels a little bit in terms of you don't want to always be chasing. If she had just played U19 when she was 12, that would have been really bad for her because she never would have had the puck. She never would have developed her skills. But if she just played at U12, she would have been lazy and scored a million goals. But to be able to kind of drifting around in between those levels really helped her to become a really good player.
We have someone uh, in common, and I use him as an example so often when I'm speaking to collegiate, high school, or even youth athletes. Do you remember Joe DePinta?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So Joe and I went to Lawrence Academy together, and in my time at Lawrence, we had, I mean, the level of talent that came out of there when I was attending was unbelievable. I think we had 6 guys who were drafted over the course of my years into the NHL.
You probably had Stevie Hines. You had
He
Eddie
was
Ronan. Were they older than you?
he was Yeah, they were before. We had a number of guys that went to BC. So Marty Hughes, in fact, the uncle of the Hughes boys that are now in the NHL, Marty is their uncle.
Oh, okay.
So he was there. There was Alesh Dolinar, and then he actually just suddenly passed away last year. It was really kind of caught everybody off guard. But Tony Vos, do you remember
Yeah.
them?
Oh, yeah. Tony Vos. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he did.
And so, anyways, out of all of these guys, Joe, from a talent standpoint, was probably at the bottom. And he is the only one that made it into the NHL. He's the only one that kind of grinded his way through it. And I still remember at Lawrence that he was consistently in and out of the weight room because it was either he or I in the weight room together. And he won a Stanley Cup with Anaheim. Anaheim's only Stanley Cup he won, and it's incredible. I mean, it just goes to show you how, to your exact point, he used average to level up, and I I think exactly what you're saying holds incredible value.
Yeah, because even at BU, he was not. I think he was never as good at BU. Like he wasn't our top offensive defenseman. Let's say that he wasn't,
Right.
and our top two offensive defensemen generally. But the interesting thing is, our top offensive defensemen tended to struggle more to stay at the NHL level than our third and fourth guys did. We probably had more 3-4 guys have long careers than we did have 1-2 guys as defensemen. Forwards were different in terms of most of our top end forwards had pretty good long careers, whether it was as that first line guy like a Tony Amonte or as a fourth line guy like a Joe Sacco or a Jay Pandolfo.
Yeah, but then you
But
had, Mike Greer too, who,
oh
you
yeah,
know, I mean,
yeah, we had lots of those guys, but it
yeah.
just they the defensemen. It was interesting because again to be that game, that top pair game, you get to the NHL, there's already a top pair. You're there, and those guys are there, and they're so good. And now it's really funny. One of my favorite guys is Hal Gill because I can remember Hal coming out of Providence, and everybody saying, "Oh, he's brutal. He's a brutal skater. Blah blah blah. He's not." But the difference was Hal was a guy that slotted right into that third pair as a defensive defenseman, and he made it right out of the gate because he wasn't worried about being on the power play. He wasn't. He was worried about, yeah, he'd be fine killing penalties, but he was one of those guys who knew exactly why he was there. And same thing, really long career. I think Hal probably played, I don't know, at least a dozen years
At
for at
least.
least like six teams. Long stretch with the Bruins, and then a bunch of teams played. Won a bunch of Stanley Cups, played in a bunch of Stanley Cup Finals. Was a guy that people would trade for late in the season because they knew how good he could be against a Yager or somebody like that. When somebody had that big, long, rangy forward, people were like, I got to get Hal Gill because I know he can shut that guy down because he's got the same type of reach. And that was why Hal was always one of my favorite guys because he was never, I don't know if he was a power play guy even at Providence. I don't remember him at Providence. I don't think he was ever a guy that was a big offensive threat.
Well, I mean, throughout your years of coaching, I mean, you've been a part of some, amazing teams, some outstanding athletes, between BU and Coach Parker and the Red Sox, the Bruins. One that really stands out for me because this was a uh, my maybe my second year with you. Um, I got to spend every training session with the 98 women's Olympic hockey team. And I knew Lori Baker because we went to Lawrence together. But that one, that experience kind of reshaped me in a number of ways. One, because some of these girls, or at for some of them were women already, were so strong. I mean, doing chin ups with 45 plate at least. Some of them, they were extremely humble. They were great to be around. But I think more importantly, it gave me a whole new respect for work ethic, for women's sports in general. But I think really where my question comes from is, out of all of these, you know, do you see common principles or traits, ethos that were among all of these teams, or even caliber athletes that you've been around?
You know what I think is interesting is, yeah, I always say, one thing, uh, talent is inversely proportional to work ethic, which means the more talented someone is, generally the worse their work habits are because they haven't had to develop them. I think the girls were a little bit different, but even the girls, we had some of the high end girls that were really hard sells to get them to do the training. I think in that 98 situation, it was different because this was the first Olympic team. And I think I've always been good at getting people to do what I want them to do. I always felt like if you give me the people, I'll figure out how to get them to do what I want. There's going to be a different key to every door. For some people, the motivation is just that, hey, I just want to make the team. For other people, it's I just want to be great. One of my favorites, Hillary Knight, is still one of my favorite people ever, and she's still playing at a really high level. She scored last night in the, I think she's 32, but she scored last night. Her and Kendall Coyne, same way. Kendall's 32 and just had a baby, and they're still playing on the top two lines. But Hillary was one. She was a very reluctant lifter. And what I've found is, so I guess things that I'm saying, one, people don't want to coach good athletes. They just want to leave them alone and have them make sure I don't want to offend them. I don't want to alienate them. So someone like Hillary had been at Wisconsin and no one had really pushed her at all. And then I got her there and I said, wow, this girl is really, I mean, obviously she's super talented anyway, but she's nowhere near where I need her to be or we need her to be from a physical standpoint. And I just told her that. I just said, I probably said to her, you can be the greatest player in the world if you're willing to do the things that I want you to do. And she was always a little bit shy and kind of, just one of those ones like I'll just go over in the corner and nobody will notice me, and I just made her like I was like no you're gonna do everything. You're gonna become like that 45-pound chin up person. You're gonna be who you should be. You should be the most physically dominant player in the world, and now she is. And so I think part of it is asking or going after those talented people in a good way, in a positive way, but saying, and I did that with the girls. This was 2010. I went back to work with the Olympic team. And I went after some of those girls and I just said, some of them, I said, you should be ashamed of yourself because you have way too much talent. We'd look at testing scores and they just, they didn't test well. And you just realize, wow, these people aren't putting in the work, but they're in our top 10 players on the team. And we kind of confronted that stuff head on. And I did that with guys, NHL guys. I was really lucky. Some of our guys, I think at BU, we were able to establish a really good culture and we were lucky. We were lucky that we had like the Mike Sullivans of the world. And Sully obviously has gone on to be really successful as a coach, but Sully was one of those guys who really wanted to play in the NHL. And he's another one like Joe and Jay. He went on from being a great college player to a great fourth line NHL guy. And there was so many of those guys that we had who just said, "Hey, I'm going to do whatever." And you might have been around when John Cullen was there, but John Cullen was kind of the guy that got the whole thing off the ground because Cully is still the all-time leading scorer at BU.
Mm,
Part of the reason because he played all 4 years, but he was drastically undersized,
mm,
not a really good skater, and he was the guy who showed up probably it would have been maybe 88 and said, I'm going to stay. I had football players that stayed in the summer, and that was it. No one else stayed. And he came into the weight room one day and he said, I'm going to stay with the football players. I will do whatever you tell me to do, but I want to play in the NHL. And I was like, hey, let's go. And he bought in and he did do everything that I asked him to do. Couldn't get an NHL contract, went to what was then the IHL,
mm-hmm.
International Hockey League, and literally had like a Wayne Gretzky year in the IHL. He had something like 180 points or 160 points, or
Wow.
some ungodly number of points,
Yep.
and then was the most sought after free agent in hockey at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up signing with the Penguins. Same thing, won a couple Stanley Cups with the Penguins. He played in the NHL All Star game, like he flat out made the NHL All Star game as a 5, maybe 9, maybe, and maybe 180 guy, but worked his ass off to get to bring his physical level to where his skill level was. His skill level was off the charts. That's why he's the all-time leading scorer at BU. I mean, he was one of those, Adam Oates type guys that
Mm,
really saw the game at a different level, but that didn't translate to the NHL because of his size and his sort of average skating. So I think it's that ability. It's easy to get guys like you and me on board, right? We want to be on board. We want to be better. We know we're not good enough. We're easy marks. The hard targets are the John Collins and the Hillary Knights and the Casey Bellamy's and Kelly Stacks and a lot of these people that I had over time that were just so talented that up until that point they probably really hadn't had to do the work.
mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you get to that very you're at close to the top of the pyramid and you realize, wow, I can't quite get over the hump here doing what I'm doing. And then it's that ability to get to that person. How do you get to that person? Cam Neely, same way. I got when I first started working with Cam Neely, I remember Cam Neely saying to me, "I don't lift weights," and I was like, "What do you mean you don't lift weights?" Like, good. But Cam had this fear that like I'm going to get muscle bound, I'm going to get too big, and it was legitimate fear for him because he was a big guy. He
Mm-hmm.
was around that time, he was in that crew tank era, hanging around, and he was a big man. He was 6'2", probably closer to and 215, 220 pounds, walking around, without lifting weights. That was just him.
Mm-hmm.
He was really physically large, big hands. But I remember looking at him and thinking, and I was like, oh, but he was very into. He's like, I'm a 50-goal scorer. I don't want to change what I'm doing. And I used to always think, how am I going to sell this guy? And part of it was he got hurt, so he had to listen to me. But part of it, I brought him one day. I in his locker. I came in out of USA Today, and I flipped a list of the 60 goal scorers in the NHL. Had him in his locker, and he's like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "That's the list of 60 goal scorers." I said, "There's 10 of them. That's it. 10 guys ever scored 60 goals." I said, that's why you should lift weights. I said, you're happy being a 50-goal scorer. And
Mm,
he just kind of looked at me like, okay, kind of touche. Like, and then after that, he bought in much more to what I was asking him to do. But it's it's always like I said. I think it's the finding the key to the door.
mm,
Everybody's got the door.
mhm.
You just got to figure out what the key to let yourself in is.
I mean, I remember you talking about, when you took over the Red Sox position, how important soft tissue work was, and and you felt like, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but if you could get some of the other guys like Ortiz on board, then the rest of the guys would follow.
Yep. Yeah, I really wanted to. I felt like everybody should roll and everybody should stretch and everybody should warm up because when I first got to the Red Sox, one of the big things then you probably remember, but at that time in the NHL, there was a big problem with oblique strains. And for whatever reason, and I don't know exactly what the reason was, but I one of the things I realized when I got to the Red Sox was that the hitters would literally show up and go in the cage and start hitting.
Hmm.
Just they'd just walk in, go put their stuff on, go to the cage, and just start taking whacks at the ball. And I remember saying, okay, we have to stop that. And I said, I talked to the hitting coach, I talked to everybody. I said, nobody can come in who hasn't warmed up. And of course, who are the two guys that I have to fight with right off the bat? Pedroia and Ortiz. And I took them aside. And Pedroia I knew because he was an Exos guy. So I knew him a little bit before. And
Hmm.
Ortiz, probably one of the nicest superstars I've ever come in contact with across the sports world. And I just said to those guys, this is really important to me. We need to get our injury rate down. These guys follow your lead. I need for you to come in here and warm up. I said, I said, come in and fake it if you have to. I said, come in and we'll talk for 5 minutes and sit on the foam roller, or whatever. I said, but I need these guys to see you buying into what I'm telling them to do. Otherwise, this whole project is not going to work. We're not going to be able to turn our injury situation around. And they both looked at me and they were like, okay, I get it. Absolutely. And there were days they'd come by, and I think it helped me too because they'd come by sometimes, and if they walk by, I'd be like, hey, let's go warm up. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, you're right. And the other guys would look and be like, he talks to Petey like that. He talks to David like that. And I was like, yeah, I talk to them like that. Everybody's got to warm up. And deep down, I knew, well, actually, on the side, I went and asked for permission to talk to him like that. I did, but I don't, I don't have to tell these other clowns that, right? I just have to say, hey, you got to. David Ortiz, we had one of those. I don't know if you ever remember. The Swiss swing was sort of. It was like a power plate cylinder
Hmm.
that you could like sit on and get your adductors and get your hips. David really liked the swing. He would just come in and use the Swiss swing for like 10 minutes, and then he'd go hit. But I didn't care. All I cared was that they stopped on their way to the cages and that they did some preparatory work. Because then I could sell the prep work to everybody else. I could do a
Hmm.
better job with guys. So you're right. But it's the same thing. The key for those guys was, hey, be a good teammate, be a good leader.
Hmm.
Whether you believe what I'm saying or not, I need you to be a good teammate and I need you to be a good leader. And those guys realized, hey, this is part of the deal. We were in last place last year, right? We need to be good teammates and we need to be good leaders. So they were. So yeah, and that's why I always say to people like we get into so much of the science and people are worried about they're worried about all the wrong stuff and they have no soft skills. I look at it and think if you do the basics well and you handle the soft skill stuff well, you handle people well, you're going to be successful. It's not about force plate numbers. It's not about a lot of the stuff that people want it to be about. It's about can I get people on a really good solid basic program, and then it's about I guess it's to some degree defining what a really good solid basic program is. I think that might be where the dispute runs more in terms of and this is what we did when I went to the Red Sox. The first thing, the Red Sox was a very interesting situation because the weight room in Fort Myers, JetBlue Park was almost done. The weight room was just getting ready to be set up. The equipment was just getting started to be shipped when I got hired. And they had actually had this vision because baseball Baseball is very much big leagues, minor leagues
Mm,
separate. Much like we're looking at ourselves on these screens in terms of, okay, you're on the big league side, I'm on the minor league side.
mhm,
And the vision of the weight room when I took over was that the weight room was going to have a line down the middle, a literal line, and that it would be two weight rooms that would be the same, but one side would be the big league weight room and the other side would be the minor league weight room.
mm,
And I went into a meeting and I looked at them and I said, "Are you guys serious?" And they said, "Well, this is the way it was laid out by the previous strength coach." I said, "Well, that is not how it's going to be. We are not going to operate with that paradigm of the good guys over here, and guys waiting, this moment of crossing the line. I get it from locker room to locker room. We need to do that, but I need this to be a facility for everybody because in baseball, you have more people than football. I think we might have had 200 players at spring training.
mm,
I know it was way more because I remember thinking football was 120, and we had way more than football. I don't know what the actual number was, but there's so many players, so many teams, so many levels, and my thing was the big league guys are here for 2 hours in the morning, and then I'm going to have half the weight room that doesn't get used all day because it's the big league weight room, and I'm going to try to jam the other 160 guys in the other side. Like,
mhm,
it made sense.
mhm,
So we reorganized everything, and we got rid of equipment, and we tried to develop more of what I would look at as more of a college style weight room where we could train groups the way we wanted to train groups. And then we started training groups, and we met as a staff, and I said, okay, this is the program, and everybody's on the program.
mhm,
Period. End of story. And that means, like in my mind, so nobody's going to back squat. There are things. Everybody's going to foam roll. Everybody's going to stretch. Everybody's going to dynamic warm up. Everybody's on the program. I
mhm,
don't care who they are. I don't care how many years of experience they have. And it was easy because our major league guys were great. We had some minor league guys who didn't want to get with the program. And my thing was, I would literally go to the minor league director and just say, hey, Ben doesn't want to get with the program. Ben thinks he knows more than me. And that would lead to an immediate meeting with Ben, where Ben was told, Ben, you're playing a double A or single A or whatever it is. You don't decide. This is no longer up to you. This is we've got a program and you're going to do it. And
mhm,
but it was just that ability. I think at sometimes when you've got major league guys who are established, then you've got to find the key. When you've got minor league guys, then you've got to establish that there is a program and that this is the way things are going to work. So there's, like I said, it's way more logistical, I think, than it is scientific.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, in all the examples is what's come up in actually a couple of the podcasts that I've done so far is this notion of nature versus nurture, and how people are naturally talented, or are they nurturing that, but it's also about the environment in which you're creating. Are you creating an environment? Are you creating a culture, an ethos, a standard, if you will? Because that's what it sounds like.
Right. And it's interesting. Trying to Genius in All of Us is a really good book about that. And what they say in Genius in All of Us is basically that it's genetics times environment. And and there's no question. If you look, the NHL is a really good example. If you look at the NHL, it's not, there's an awful lot of good players in the NHL right now whose dads were good players in the NHL.
Hmm.
Kachuks are a really simple example, but there's a lot more of those kids that are out there. And you just have to look at that and think there is a huge genetic advantage.
Hmm.
And then those kids get an environmental advantage. If you grow up in a situation where, one, you've got more money, you've got more access to ice time, like all of those things, those kids are going to excel if you can get the right work habits also with those kids. So it's great, obviously, to win the genetic lottery.
Hmm.
It's the easiest place to start.
Right.
But then, and this is what I loved about Genius and All of Us, they said genetics times environment. So the way I used to express it to people was you might be a 10 genetically, but you're in a 1 environment. That makes you a 10, period. I might get another kid who's a 5 genetically, but I put him in a 10 environment. He's a 50.
Hmm.
That 10 in the 10 environment, top score is 100. If you get a kid who's a 10 genetically and you put him in a 10 environment, he's 100.
Mm-hmm.
That's Keith's kids, right? I mean, they're elite level players.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at other kids that think they were 10s, but maybe they were in 5 environments and now they're 50s.
Yep.
So I think you've got to be able to look at that and realize that the environment's a multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
And that the environment, like I said, for someone like you might have been a 5 and you fell into the 10 environment. And suddenly you rose up to being a level of the 50. I might have been a 2 in a 10 environment and I never got beyond 20, which means I never played beyond my freshman year of college.
Yeah.
But you've got to realize it is the combination of those factors. And the bottom line is that if you've got a kid who has no talent, I don't care how much money you're going to spend on him and or her and their hockey, they may not end up being any good. But if you can get a kid who has ability and then put them in the proper place, the environment is like you said, it's a place that has a culture and it's a place that has an ethos. It's not just a place like, oh, I'll just send them to IMG Academy where they have the best of everything. That's not necessarily the way that it works. You can find great environments without having to maybe leave where you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've always done. The one thing that we did, whether it was at BU or later on at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, is we created that really good environment for people so that
Yes.
we gave everybody that came into the environment a chance to be as good as they could be. Maybe, and you're never going to be better than you could be, right? You're never going, I mean, everybody has a ceiling. But what we wanted to do was push as many people as we could as close to the ceiling as we possibly could.
Yeah. I mean, statistically speaking, of the youth athletes that walk through my door, and I'm sure yours as well, very few will play in college. Even fewer will probably go on after that. I mean, I think you even said, look, if you're not the best, the standout athlete on your high school team, you're probably not going Division One. The impact that I had, 22 years ago in the depths of BU, going, maybe this kid could be healthier down the road. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to you know shift, or maybe go on a different path, instead of just thinking that, because I also think that strength and conditioning plays a huge role in confidence, in self-esteem, in our self-worth.
No, that honestly, it's really funny. There is no question. And that was when I decided to open a business, truthfully. When I realized, and I can remember they were two, I tell people this story all the time, and I remember their name. I don't even know why the other day, but Foley's, the Foley brothers, they were from Belmont Hill. And one of them was heavier, was a football player. One of them, I think, was a hockey player. But I met the mom.
Pat Foley.
No, not that. Nope, not Pat. These guys, Pat played at UNH.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, these guys were not. They weren't great athletes. They were Belmont Hill kids, and but the mom just went on and on about their habits,
Mm.
and that they ate better, and that they were excited about going to workouts, and I just remember she was in her car, and I was sitting there listening to her, and I'm thinking, wow, there's really way more to this than what I had initially thought they were. I had initially looked at this just as training, right, and that we're doing training, and when we train, we get better. Pretty logical. But then I started to see, wow, like from a big picture standpoint, there's much more going on here in terms of you're changing people at a time when they're still really a little bit malleable. And you can take that kid and change their work habits and change their nutritional habits and change their view towards exercise. And again, I think we did that a lot with a lot of guys. There were a lot of guys who, like you, who came in and maybe said, well, I thought this way when I started, but because of being in the environment, like you said, seeing the 98 women's team, being around the BU guys, like it was hard. Like you're in there and you're looking at whatever, Chris Drury, like I don't know who were guys that were there during that time, but it was probably that where you're looking at a lot of these pro guys that are there in the mornings and you're thinking, wow, I could do this. I can be better. I can play at the college level. You start to become maybe a little more aspirational than you were before. So that was when I realized there's a business here. Now we're seeing that. What's interesting, because obviously you've got your place now, we're seeing that we're changing adult lives.
Yes.
And suddenly you're getting people who are coming in and realizing, wow, some people, because now we get a lot of people who I think, or I describe, they're almost off the cliff, right? They've almost let themselves go so far that if it goes another year or two, it's going to be really tough to pull them back. And we can get those people and put them in our adult program. And suddenly you end up with these lifers who realize, wow, my quality of life has increased drastically since I've been here. And I'm part of this really cool, really supportive community. And there are all these positive things that happen. And that's when I guess you realize the business opportunity is way more. I say this all the time. If you've watched our staff meetings, I always tell our staff, we're in the life-changing business. That's
Yes,
what we're,
sir.
whether that's kids, whether that's adults, we can get an adult who comes in who maybe is overweight and overstressed and just on a really disastrous path, and we can take that person and suddenly put them on a much better path. We can do the same thing with a kid who maybe is not on a great path and get them on a better path. We can take a kid who maybe didn't believe in themselves, didn't think they were going to be any good, and suddenly the confidence that you get from the weight room suddenly starts to translate into how that kid plays and how that kid carries themselves. Like those are all. I mean, I'm proudest probably of people like you, or people like Mary Kate Fight, or people that have gone on, that have been there in the gym training and then realize, wow, Sarah Cahill's another one. These are all people who realize this is what I'm going to do for a living. This is what my career path is going to be. That's when you see, wow, I've really made a big impact. Yeah, we made a lot of athletes better. That's great. I'm very happy that we did that. But the fact that we made people want to become coaches is much more significant in my mind.
Mm. Would you say that that's what you want your legacy to be?
Um, yes, I would. I think that's if you said that's what would your legacy, well, I guess I no I take it back. I'm going to say I think what I would want my legacy to be, honestly, above and beyond all of that, is that I was a really good husband and that I was a really good dad. Like I always tell everybody, if that was it, if someone just said to me, hey, Mike Boyle, he was like a super average strength coach, but Jesus, he was a good husband and his kids turned out really good, I'd be like, perfect. I won.
Mhm.
If I could look at that and someone said, wow, Mike Boyle was a really good strength coach and developed a really good business and impacted a lot of people, and he was a really good dad, and he was a really good husband, then yeah, that's what I would want my legacy to be. But I would always want to make sure that I took care of the things that were really important first,
Mhm.
because I think I see too many people in the work world who worry about being really good at their job, and then they're not good. Their primary responsibility, they fail. And so I think you want to kind of keep the horse in front of the cart, I guess, and make sure that you're doing the important things first,
Yeah.
and you're keeping your priorities in order, which is important for me. I mean, that's why I left the Red Sox. I was talking to another friend of mine on Monday, and he said, "How much money did you leave on the table when you left the Red Sox?" And I said, "A lot, but it's only money." And what I was trading at that time, I was trading my kids' time for money.
Mhm.
And I got to a point where I thought that's no longer a trade I'm willing to make. I'd much rather, when they tell you that you can't put a price on that time, they're right.
Mhm.
So when you look at that and think, I got to go to almost every game. I saw almost every game my daughter played, and I saw almost every game my son played. The only time that I didn't see both games was if my daughter had a college game that was somewhere far enough away that it made me miss one of my son's games. But
Mhm.
other than that, I never, like, there was never a time when I was home in my house when my kids had a game. Never. That has
Mhm.
never happened in my life. And I still Michaela's coaching actually with Trisha Dunn, who was on the '98 team. Talk about doing chin ups with a
I
45
yeah.
plate.
Oh yeah. That
She's
was
she's
her.
Yep, she's Trisha's assistant out at the Breck School out in Minnesota. And I mean, I watch her games on cable or whatever, on the computer. I
Yeah.
put them on my TV because I mean that's the stuff that really matters. If you can leave that legacy of people, kids who become contributors, then I think you've really done something.
Yeah.
And and then if you can maybe help somebody else's kids become contributors, then again you've also really done something because I feel like yeah, we've provided a really good environment for a lot of people. Like when you talk about things, what I'm really proud of the number of guys we have that are coaching in the NHL.
Mm,
Really proud of the number of guys we have that are general managers. I think like, of our workout group, we have two team presidents, I think five general managers and four head coaches currently in the National Hockey League, and on like a million assistant GMs and player development directors, and and I look and think, wow, we created an environment that really helped these guys
yeah.
to kind of live the dream, and a lot of them now are really living the dream at a high level. When you look at Chris Drury or Mike Greer or Billy Guerin, or it's amazing, and it's amazing. Like in my case, my daughter Michaela got to go to the Wild training camp, and the head coach is John Hines, who played for us at BU, who was a great guy, and the general manager is Billy Guerin, and she's at camp getting treated like a rock star.
Yeah.
She texted me and said, "Dad, I just watched the scrimmage with Billy Guerin. I sat with Billy and watched." In literally, she said I was cold. He went and got me a Minnesota Wild jacket and just told me to keep it. Right? But here's a kid who's 25 years old,
Yeah.
living in Minnesota, and she's sitting watching training camp with the general manager.
Yeah.
And I look at that and think that's a really positive byproduct of the things that I did when I was younger. Because I never said, "Hey, I'm going to be really nice to Billy Guerin because I think he might become
Right.
an NFL general manager someday."
Yeah.
I just happened to really like Billy Guerin, and I thought he was a great guy, and we got along really well. But now those things, all of these things, they talk about kind of the chickens come home to roost. Things, what goes around comes around. However you want to look at it. I'm living in a fairly nice karmic world right now, where what has gone around is coming around. My daughter got to go to Utah's training camp the same way.
Hmm.
Devin McConnell's out at Utah, who was one of our interns. Bill Armstrong is their general manager, who was a minor league defenseman for us when I was with the Bruins.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing in terms of you get opportunities that come back to you in times far removed from you know when you actually did something, and then suddenly you realize, wow, the fact that I gave a shit is continuing to pay get dividends for me,
Yeah.
which is good.
I mean, comes down to just treating someone like a human, and
Yeah,
God forbid you care.
right. And I mean, golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have people do unto you. Treat people the way that you would want to be treated. And that's what I mean about it. I think we make it way too complicated. I always look at that and think that's all it is. If you operate every day from that perspective, you will more than likely be successful. I don't
Hmm.
care what you can choose the field of endeavor, but if you treat people the way that you want to be treated, you're probably going to end up okay at the end.
Yeah. One last question, because I know that we're at
Oh,
time.
what a
If
fast hour, crazy.
Yeah, I wanna honor your time here. Along that same line, I believe the biggest challenge and the biggest issue we face in long-term athletic development is ego. You know, my program's better than your program, or their program sucks. I don't know what they're doing, but you know it seems very, very combative, very ego driven. You even said, I'll get back to that, but how do how do we I was going to use the example of like your such benign post about adults not using barbells and how that just like blew the hell up. you said earlier, we can all agree that there needs to be some foundational level. But where we all split is, what that looks like. So I'm wondering, you know, from a long-term athletic development standpoint, when it comes to athletes, parents, coaches, organizations, you know, what would your recommendation be for, let's say, overall, or you can pick one of the categories, and to resolve this issue.
Well, it's a tough one because I think the problem that we run into, and I actually did a half hour thing with Mark Verstegen the other day, and one of the things that I said is I'm really happy because I feel like he and I did a really good job of kind of moving the needle and moving the profession forward. But at other times, I look and think, wow, we really haven't gotten very far.
Mhm,
So I think part of the problem is that we need the basic education level to be better. And that's where, like you said, ego. There are too many people. So I did another podcast yesterday, and for probably the last 10 years, I've based a lot of my lectures around Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And I think what happens in strength and conditioning is that, and in a lot of other areas, but in strength and conditioning particularly, is we start with what? We have an opinion of what the best style of training is, and that's what we start with.
mhm,
Whereas I look at someone like me and I think I start with why. I start and say, because again, what I might say is important is going to vary depending on the why. So I'll give you a perfect example. I go to work for the Red Sox, and I'm coming from the Mike Boyle strength and conditioning background. We're really big Olympic lifting people, but I know right off the bat, okay, that is not a good starting point in Major League Baseball,
mhm,
right? So we came right in, and I was like, no one's going to Olympic lift. No, we're not going to clean. We're not going to snatch. We're going to figure out, we're going to do body weight power. We're going to do plyos. We're going to use our MVP shuttles. We're going to use our Kaiser squat. We've got stuff that we can do to develop power. But because I'm starting from why. Why am I doing this? Well, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because these guys want to be better baseball players. I'm not starting with what and saying, well, I'm a really big believer in Olympic lifting, and I'm a really big believer in whatever. So I think part of that is we need more coaches to really examine their whys and their whats and ask themselves and try to come back to the fact, am I inadvertently a what guy? Am I a guy who identifies as, hey, I'm a West Side guy, or I'm a kettlebell guy, or I'm a CrossFit guy, or I'm a bodybuilding guy, whatever it is? If that's where you come from, then you start with what, and then you try to fit the system to your what. Whereas I want to look at it and say, okay, let's start with why. Why are we doing this? And we always thought, if you look at like Seneca in the book, he has the golden circle, why is at the center. And then it goes why, and then how, and then what. So why am I doing it? Then how am I going to do it? And then what am I going to do?
mhm.
What should be in the third level? And what should be based on why and how? So when I start looking at that, you start thinking, okay, that's like for us, the idea we're going to keep people healthy. I don't think that that should be disputable.
Mhm,
But yet it is. There are people, like particularly in the CrossFit world, who would say, "Hey, getting hurt's part of the deal. If you train hard, you might get hurt." I look at it and think, I don't think I want to operate that way.
mhm,
I'm not going to operate from the standpoint of if you're going to train hard, you might get hurt. I'm going to look at this and think I'm going to try to design a training program that absolutely minimizes that possibility. I'm not going to say it will never happen, but I'm certainly not going to accept it as maybe a logical byproduct of training. So I think there's a long way to go from a coach education standpoint. I don't think we're there yet. I'm hoping that we can get better,
mhm.
but time will tell.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to end this. I think it's very well said of having all facets: athlete, coach, parent, organization start with why, because I think that in and of itself clouds so many of the poor decision making across the board. And I just think that's it's a great place to have an actionable step. So
And I would agree.
uh,
And I'm just going to say one more thing before we go, because I
yeah,
think it's the perfect. When you talk about long term athletic development, we forget that sports are supposed to be a vehicle to make our children better functioning adults. That's when you talk about the why. Why are we doing this? Why do our kids play sports? They play sports to learn about cooperation. They play sports to learn about competition. They play sports to learn how to be a good teammate. All these things, these are really why they're doing this. These are why people in the work world like they want to hire people that are athletes. They want to hire people that were team captains. They want to hire and I think if we go back, if we can get that why, that horse in front of that cart again, things will be much better. Whereas most people, now you talk about ego, most people get their kids involved in sports because they want to validate themselves. I want to be able to brag about how good my kid is. I want my kid to get a scholarship. We watch people, and it's about getting a scholarship. It's not about saving the money, it's about getting the scholarship because you'll watch people spend more money in pursuit of the scholarship than they would have gotten. That people always say you'd be way better off spending your money on tutors and paying for education than you would be pumping money into hockey or whatever. You pump money into hockey, you're throwing out easy. I mean, 10,000 a year is anybody in youth hockey now, right? And some kids, if you're playing junior, you can be in for 30, 40 grand a year, easy, before you ever get to college, which as return on investment is makes no sense. There are people spending 20 grand a year and their kid's going to go to an SCAC school and they're going to still pay 60 grand a year or 70 grand a year or 80 grand a year. It makes no sense at all, but it's that parental validation. And that's the problem is have you read Inside Out Coaching?
no.
Read Inside Out Coaching. Joe Ehrman, really, really good book. But he says early on in the book that the most competitive sport in the world is parenting. And that is probably true. And everybody, and I say this, I've had my moments where I've been a bad parent. I've been a moment where I have not been the best hockey dad out there. I've yelled in the stands. And everybody's going to do it. I would say everybody will turn into a parent usually at the worst time. But it's being able to kind of right yourself and realize that, all right, okay, that was out of line. And even I've told my kids when I'm out of line, I tell the kids, sorry that I shouldn't have done that. That was out of line. So that at least they know that I know when I'm wrong and I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong and hopefully learn from it. And I have gotten better. I don't know if I'll ever.
You're like a recovering addict. I've gotten
Yeah.
better.
Oh, yeah. But everybody, because you can't. And I said you can't help it when it's your kid.
Yeah.
There are going to be times where you're going to make really bad decisions, and you have to be able to look at that and think, wow, that was a really bad decision. That was poor behavior. That was based on my sometimes it's based on your love for your child,
Mhm.
but that does not make it right. You can't say anything that you do because you love your kid suddenly becomes right because that's not accurate either. So there's a lot to it. We could have done this for never mind an hour. We could have done this for a day.
Well, look, I mean, I got plenty more questions. But I honestly think the last statement that you made was the the huge golden nugget coming out of this, and I just think um, I think people will hopefully see the well. I hope that people will see the value. I mean, I think sometimes people are a bit, stuck, but
Without a doubt.
yeah. But coach, look, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate not just this, but really thanking you for more than 20 some years of impact because, your pebble that you tossed has continued to ripple. And I I can't tell you a day that your impact is not impacting what we do outside this office here. And whether kids or adults are going to do anything professionally, from an athletic standpoint, the impact that you have had on me allows me to impact their lives in ways that are almost immeasurable. They just keep on going. So really, really thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, we can do another one.
Well, I got more questions. So we got
All right.
and what you even gave me today has even more questions. So I'll do my due diligence and be back in touch. But thank you again and have yourself a fantastic weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
First scrimmage for my son tomorrow. So lacrosse is practically a winter sport now,
Yeah,
which is great.
right?
But yeah, they're going to be. They'll somebody's shoveling a field right now, getting ready for this scrimmage. And the D1 team started last week, which is even crazier.
I,
So
I coach a D1 lacrosse referee, which is awesome. It's such a different perspective,
yeah.
and he's got a game up at Marquette in a
Oh,
bubble.
you up in yeah. Oh, I was going to say that's got to be indoors up there.
Yeah, it's they have a bubble over the field, so you know you're right. They've already started. So good
All
luck.
right. Does this have to upload on yours, or can I just sign out?
Oh, I'll stop it.
Okay, no, that's fine because I know sometimes some of the platforms they you have to wait a second and for it to upload, and if you
No,
don't,
you're all
good.
good. I'm gonna stop it. Good luck. Have a
Hey,
great time.
thanks. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks. You too. Be a good dad. All right.